Hi, Richard. How you doing?
Hey, good morning, Keith Jones. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. It's always good to see you, man. Every time I see you, I just think about fellowship, breaking bread, man, and just being so grateful, man, that we take this time to cultivate and nurture our friendship and relationship. We're just grateful.
Yeah, and time is important, and it's easy to let time get in the way of things too. And I'm guilty of that. And I think most people who are viewing are guilty of it too. We get so into our own lives that we forget about some of our close relationships, which are rejuvenating and help us resolve our own sometimes insecurities, sometimes hurts and so forth. It's like going to a very safe place in the world to be with your friends and loved ones. And I miss that too.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, Rick, for saying that because it's really a great little segue into today's topic, which is to give yourself and others grace. And when you mention that safe place, when I think about grace, it creates a safe place for people to really, grow and stumble along the way, to make mistakes and all those things. And there have been a ton of people in my life that have given me grace along the way that I am forever grateful to. And then there have been some people that that didn't give me any grace, and
And you learn from them. You learn
I'm
from
grateful for them. I'm grateful for them too. And there've been people that I haven't given any grace to. And I think that what's the barrier to grace, giving grace to yourself and to others is judgment. It's judgment of the people. And when I judge other people, I really lose any kind of awareness that or knowledge that whatever I'm accusing this person of or judging them about is pretty certain that I've done something very similar in my life, too, that I am blaming them for, making them wrong for, or something like that. And then it takes an experience for me. It's taken an experience of me going through something similar that I judge somebody else for me to start to have compassion, and it creates space and give people grace. And with the practice, what's happened is I don't have to have experienced what they have done or what they're going through to have grace and empathy for them. I don't even have to. I don't have to check in and go through this list. Like, did I do something similar? Have I been on that side of things? And I think that's what a lot of people, at least what I used to do when it came to empathy. I like, okay, let me put myself in those shoes. And I think that's one step to help you practice empathy. But I think once you really start to do the practice, you don't have to think about whether you were in somebody's shoes. It's just you are just empathetic. You just give grace. And I know a lot of people may think that, well, is giving grace letting people off the hook? And like, you're not doing any of that. You're just creating space for people to walk their path. And well, what about the consequences? Most likely those consequences are up to someone else to enforce. And I'm a great believer that my path is to be kind, to be loving, compassionate, and with the topic of this podcast, to extend grace. And whatever the consequences are, that's not my job. You can avoid your responsibilities, but you can't avoid the consequences of avoiding those responsibilities. So that's up to someone else, man. But I know I've been a beneficiary of people giving me grace, and I just give it out all the time, man. Like I'm handing out flowers, Rick. I just give them out all the time.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I guess one of the things that strikes me about the topic is that we'd first have to settle on what a definition might be of grace. And for me, when you say grace, I think of three things kind of combined and overlapping and all creating something different than each of the definitions for each of those words. And the three words that I would think of would be acceptance,
Hmm.
tolerance, and
Yes.
most of all, love.
Yes.
A great margin of error. It's like anything that you love, you sort of have a freebie. You give a freebie to, right? I mean,
Right.
and if we love ourselves, we give plenty of freebies to ourselves about maybe not being our best in a given interaction or course of conduct where we weren't great about something. And I think that grace is really a lost topic in our culture. It implies almost a giving up or a laying down or a relinquishment of defenses. And we're such a competitive culture that that seems to be a weak quality. And I would go just the opposite, that grace, that idea of accepting and tolerating and loving self and others, is really the kind of cushion that you need against a harsh competitive world. The harsh competitive world is not going to yield to your harshness in return. What's required, I think, is a different attitude about how difficult the world might be. And once I think we get into the habit of giving ourselves and other grace, we come to a different place in life. We come
Yes.
to a place of more peace, more conciliation, the feeling that the most important thing that you might have is the feeling that things are smooth and going well. And even if they're not, that feeling of grace with the tolerance and acceptance that we extend to ourselves and to others and to a circumstance, I think is very, very helpful in mental health and emotional stability. Grace, tolerance, acceptance, and love.
Rick, I absolutely love that, man. Those three, those are money, man. Thank you for like dropping that wisdom, because that I love the definition that you just expressed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think that when I look at, we kind of have this expectation, right? I think and let me just say, I used to have this expectation that when people had a certain title, a certain role, that they were expected to be perfect. And in my mind, in a lot of situations, I was expected to be perfect too, even though we know that none of that's true. If you have this title, you're supposed to be this as a manager, as a CEO, as a, whatever you fill in the blank, as a parent. But that's really not it. We don't give people space to make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, give them the opportunity to learn from them and to do better. And so, and what grace means is maybe you give them one chance, but if they make another mistake, then you're like, well, that's it. And as human beings, man, we're always stumbling. Sometimes, hopefully, with the practice, you're stumbling up or stumbling forward. But even if you stumble back, man, to give people a soft landing, and we oftentimes don't do that, especially for a person who really wants to grow, wants to get better. They really care. I think it's really important as a society that we give them that chance, man. I won't mention names, but there's a politician who really said something. He had a past in which he was really, really insensitive because it was common back then regarding race. And he was, when it came out several decades later about what he did, he got vilified in the media. And they were calling for him to step down and things like this. And he didn't. He refused to step down. And since that, the things that he's done for that state as governor have been tremendous in terms of human rights, equality, diversity, inclusion. It's just been absolutely phenomenal. And so I think that we lack a lot of that in our society to give people the opportunity to learn from the errors, and a lot of the behavior, of course, was unconscious or, just wasn't well thought out, or you didn't know it would be as harmful as it was. And then, societies evolve, they change, they grow. Hopefully, they grow, and then you're like, oh, can't do that today. And then with that, you give people an opportunity to reinvent themselves, so to speak. And I think that's really, really critical. I think another thing that can be a barrier to people being apt to extend grace is what I found is it's often people that aren't vulnerable. So because when you're vulnerable, in my mind, you let people see at least some parts of you that is really true, raw, and authentic. As you say, all the warts, all the mistakes, everything else that you've done that you may not be proud of, but you let them see you really clearly. And when you do that, the ego hates it because by being vulnerable, you lose that superiority that you were clinging to.
That's right.
But it humanizes you and it humanizes the other person, so you can connect on a very human level, on a very human being level. And on that level, you can really help each other grow. But like I've seen managers who are and leaders who are quick to judge other people. And I'm more inspired by a manager who said, "Hey, listen, let me tell you about something that I did that I failed at." Like, and I was able to immediately connect with him. And along the way, we just kept giving each other grace along the way as we shared and connected and helped each other grow. And that was just such a powerful thing, man, to do that. And I get the privilege of working with some really incredible and accomplished physicians at Mayo Clinic, as well as some administrative leaders. And the ones who do that, Rick, man, they're so, I mean, they're so, they're servant leaders. They are just, they're really, really amazing. And they haven't lost one bit of standing in my eyes or by other people. They've lost none of that because of their ability to be open, vulnerable, to apologize when they don't get it, when they don't behave, in a correct fashion or make a decision that's really in the best interest of everyone. They're able to apologize for it. And I think it's that grace that really helps create the space for that. And for me, vulnerability is very much connected with it.
I think that's a great point, Keith. I think grace is tied up with the concept also of being real. As you're pointing out, people who are I think we gravitate toward because they do exhibit tolerance and love and that kind of environment is just something that you crave and you want to be with. I have a book that you might enjoy that's on this topic.
I'm leaning in. Can you see me leaning in? I'm always leaning in.
Okay. I've been reading a good many of her books. Her name is Susan Campbell. She's a psychologist. And this book is called Seven New Ways to Authentic Communication and Relationship Success, Saying What's Real. I don't know if you can.
Oh, yeah, I see it right there. It's perfect, Rick.
Saying what's real. Now, that's an interesting topic because often we don't say what's real because we're afraid of looking bad or we're afraid of stepping on toes, and then that person will become an enemy, and that hurts our ego, and we want to maintain as few enemies as possible. But the reality is grace requires a level of authenticity, and grace in turn gives you a level of inner peace that you probably can't find if you continue to just be inauthentic. So Campbell's point is that it's very difficult to have real conversations, but like the practice, it's part of the habit that you develop once you decide that you're going to go down that road. So in my view, grace may be something that's relatively foreign to people, but once you get a taste of it, it's like anything else that's a habit in the practice. You start developing a way of customizing that for yourself and in a way that makes you more productive. And by productive, I mean understanding and capable of doing the things that you want with heart and authenticity. And I think it also helps you realize that there's nothing in the world to fear that you have to prepare a shell for or a defense to,
right?
Other than the things that are truly going to cause you issues. And usually it's not something like someone failing to say good morning.
Right.
So I think that grace is a wonderful thing. You know it when you see it, and it's wonderful to be around people who exhibit it. And it's even more wonderful to extend it to others.
I totally agree, Rick. When you have those really like straight conversations, like Campbell, like you referenced that Campbell talks about in her book, I think grace is really an important part of that. And when do you know that if you're really given grace, right? Is that when someone has a straight conversation with you, and a straight conversation, people say, I'm brutally honest. Well, you can be honest without being cruel. When I think about the brutal part, I mean, there can be cruelty involved in that. How do you be honest and kind at the same time? And what I found is when I make it about like what my barriers or limitations are, or how something is landing on me, then I'm taking that on in terms of it's not your problem, or you're not the problem. It's what this triggered in me or whatever. And so let me work on that. I'm just sharing this with you, and maybe we can create a partnership in which we can show up for each other in a way that is harmonious, that has a lot of equanimity and balance in our relationship, and we both get to just really uh, enjoy each other. And then I'll close with this last point regarding the grace part, is that I look back in my life and I look at the number of people that I did not give grace to. And I think parents is, for a lot of people, is a really great place to start looking, is how much you blame your parents for, or hold them accountable for, either during your childhood or how they live their lives today, or whatever the case may be, the views that they hold that are much different than your own. I think that's a great place to look. And another place I think is with the self, like how much grace are you giving yourself?
Yes.
While you hold yourself, at least I try to hold myself to a high standard. I let go of expectations, but hold myself to a high standard. Like I want to be a contribution. Like I just starts there. My goal is to remove all the barriers that are in the way of me being a contribution to others. Period. That's where I start and stop. Everything in the way of that is where my focus is. And fortunately, life gives you a lot of things to focus on along the way. And when not if I, but when I, stumble, I give myself grace, and I get right back on the path, and I try to move forward. But I think that grace is really important. As you mentioned, Rick, it involves acceptance. It involves, you said acceptance. It involves love and tolerance. Yes, it involves those things. And I just think it's a beautiful thing. And I've been a recipient of it. And people in my life can count on me to continue to give it to them.
Great, Keith. Well, you're a walking example of the practice and the inner peace and the joy, personal joy that comes with following the practice that's devoted to a mission of life service, consideration for others, and most of all, grace for self and grace in every circumstance for all people.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. I love you.
I love you, man. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.